Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today I'm going to start on a small series. Shouldn't be too long. I am reading and discussing the Communist Manifesto. Too often, we get propaganda crying, oh, communism does this, communism does that. And the truth is, most people have never fucking read or delved into anything that deals with the actual subject. They never do any proper study. They let morons like Hannity, like Carlson, all these propaganda networks tell them what to think. And what we're going to do right here, we're going to read on it. We're going to talk about it. It'll probably take a few episodes, a handful, 3, maybe 4. But, with that said, let's go ahead and hop into this. We'll start off with the preface, which adds about another 6 pages or so. The Communist Manifesto. Preface. The manifesto was published as the platform of the Communist League, a working man's association, first exclusively German, later on international, and under political conditions of the continent before 1848, unavoidably a secret society. At a Congress of the League held in London in November of 1847, Marx and Engels were commissioned to prepare for publication a complete theoretical and practical party program. Drawn up in German in January of 1848, the manuscript was sent to the printers in London a few weeks before the French Revolution of February 24. A French translation was brought out in Paris shortly before the insurrection of June in 1848. The first English translation by Miss Helen Macfarlane appeared in George Julian Harney's Red Republican, London, 1850. A Danish and Polish edition had also been published. The defeat of the Parisian insurrection of June in 1848, the first great battle of the proletariat and bourgeoisie, drove again into the background, for a time, the social and political aspirations of the European working class. Thenceforth, the struggle of supremacy was again, as it had been for the Revolution of February, solely between the different sections of the propertied class. The working class was reduced to a fight for political elbow room and to the position of extreme wing of the middle class radicals. Whether independent proletarian movements continued to show signs of life, they were ruthlessly hunted down. Thus, the Prussian police hunted out the central board of the Communist League and was located in Cologne. The members were arrested after 18 months imprisonment, they were tried in October of 1852. This celebrated Cologne Communist trial lasted from October the 4th till November the 12th. 7 of the prisoners were sentenced to terms of imprisonment in a fortress varying from 3 to 6 years. Immediately after the sentence, the League was formally dissolved by the remaining members. As to the Manifesto, it seemed thenceforth to be doomed to oblivion. When the European working class had recovered sufficient strength for another attack on the ruling classes, the International Workingmen's Association sprang up. But this association, formed with the express aim of welding into one body the whole militant proletariat of Europe and America, could not at once proclaim the principles laid down in the Manifesto. The International was bound to have a program broad enough to be acceptable to the English trade unions and the followers of Proudhon in France, Belgium, Italy, and Spain, and to the Lassallians in Germany. Marx, who drew up this program to the satisfaction of all parties, entirely trusted to the intellectual development of the working class, which was sure to result from combined action and mutual discussion. The very events and vicissitudes of the struggle against capital were the defeats even more than the victories, could not help bringing home to men's minds the insufficiency of their various favorite nostrums, and preparing the way for a more complete insight into the true conditions of the working class emancipation. And Marx was right. The International, on the breaking up in 1874, left the workers quite different men from what it had found them in 1864. Proudhonism in France, Lassallianism in Germany were dying out, and even the conservative English trade unions, though most of them had long since severed their connection with the International, were gradually advancing towards that point at which last year at Swansea their president could say in their name, "Continental socialism has lost its terrors for us." In fact, the principles of the Manifesto had made considerable headway among the working men of all countries. The Manifesto itself thus came out to the front again. The German text had been, since 1850, reprinted several times in Switzerland, England, and America. In 1872, it was translated into English in New York, where the translation was published in Woodbull and Claflin's Weekly. From this English version, a French one was made in La Socialiste of New York, since when at least two more English translations, more or less mutilated, have been brought out in America, and one of them has been printed in England. The first at Herzen's Colicol office in Geneva about 1863, the second one by the heroic Vera Zasalich, also in Geneva in 1882. A new Danish edition is to be found in Socialdemokratisk Bibliotek in Copenhagen in 1885. A fresh French translation in La Socialiste Paris in 1886. From this latter, a Spanish version was prepared and published in Madrid in 1886. The German reprints are not to be counted. There have been 12 altogether at least. An Armenian translation, which was to be published in Constantinople some months ago, did not see the light, I am told, because the publisher was afraid of bringing out a book with the name of Marx on it, while the translator declined to call it his own publication. Of further translations into other languages I have heard, but have not seen them. Thus, the history of the Manifesto reflects in its great extent the history of the modern working class. At present, it is undoubtedly the most widespread, the most international production of all socialist literature, the common platform acknowledged by millions of working men from Siberia to California. Yet, when it was written, we could not have called it a socialist manifesto. By socialists in 1847 were understood, on the one hand, the adherents of the various utopian systems. Owenites in England, Fourierists in France, both of them already reduced to the position of mere sects, and gradually dying out. On the other hand, the most multifarious social quacks, also by all manners of tinkering, professed to redress without any danger to capital and profit all sorts of social grievances in both cases when outside the working class movement and looking rather to the educated classes for support. Whatever portion of the working classes had become convinced of the insufficiency of mere political revolutions and had proclaimed the necessity of a total social change, that portion then called itself communist. It was a crude, rough-hewn, purely instinctive sort of communism. Still, it touched the cardinal point and was powerful enough among the working class to produce the utopian communism in France of Cabet, and in German middle-class movement, communism, a working class movement. Socialism was, on the continent at least, respectable. Communism was very opposite. And as our notion from the very beginning was that the emancipation of the working class must be the act of the working class itself, there could be no doubt as to which the two names we must take. Moreover, we have ever since been far from repudiating it. The Manifesto being our joint production, I consider myself bound to the state that the fundamental proposition which forms its nucleus belongs to Marx. That proposition is that in every historical epoch, the prevailing mode of economic production and exchange and the social organization necessarily following from it, from the basis upon which it is built up, and from which alone can be explained the political and intellectual history of that epoch, that consequently the whole history of mankind since the dissolution of primitive tribal society holding land in common ownership has been a history of class struggles, contests between exploiting and exploited, ruling and oppressed classes. That the history of these class struggles form a series of evolution in which nowadays a stage has been reached where the exploited and the oppressed class, the proletariat, cannot attain its emancipation from the sway of the exploiting and ruling class, the bourgeoisie, without at the same time and once for all emancipating society at large from all exploitation, oppression, class distinctions, and class struggles. This proposition, which, in my opinion, is destined to do for history what Darwin's theory has done for biology, we, both of us, had been gradually approaching for some years before 1845. How far I had independently progressed toward it is best shown by my condition of the working class in England. But when I again met Marx at Brussels in the spring of 1845, he had it already worked out and put it before me in terms almost as clear as those in which I have stated here. From our joint preface to the German edition of 1872, I quote the following. However much the state of things may have altered during the last 25 years, the general principles laid down in this manifesto are on the whole as correct today as ever. Here and there some detail might be improved. The practical application of the principles will depend upon the manifesto, as the manifesto itself states, everywhere and at all times on the historical conditions for the time being existing, and for that reason no special stress is laid on the revolutionary measures proposed at the end of section 2. That passage would, in many respects, be very different worded today. In the view of the gigantic strides of modern industry since 1848 and the accompanying improved and extended organization of the working class, in the view of the practical experience gained first in the February Revolution and then still more in the Paris Commune, where the proletariat for the first time held political power for the 2 whole months. This program has in some details been antiquated. One thing especially was proved by the Commune, viz. That the king especially, that the working class cannot simply lay hold on the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes. See the Civil War in France, address in the General Council of the International Workmen's Association, London True Love, 1871, page 15, where this point is further developed. Further, it is self-evident that the criticism of the socialist literature is deficient in relation to the present time because it comes down only in 1847. Also, the remarks on the relation of the communist to the various opposition parties, although in principle will still correct, yet in practice are antiquated because the political situation has been entirely changed and the progress of history has swept them off the earth. The greater portion of the political parties there enumerated. But then the manifesto has become a historical document which we have no longer any right to alter. The present translation is by Mr. Samuel Moore, the translator of the greater portion of Marx's Capital. We have revised it, and I have added a few notes explanatory of historical allusions. Friedrich Engels, London, January the 30th, 1888. This takes us into the main text. Manifesto of the Communist Party by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. A specter of haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. There is a party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power. Where the opposition that has not hurled back the branding reproach of communism against the more advanced opposition parties, as well as against its revolutionary adversaries. Two things result from this fact. One, communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be in itself a power. Two, it is high time that communists should openly, in the face of the whole world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery table of the specter of communism with a manifesto of the party itself. To this end, the communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto to be published in the English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. 1. Bourgeoisie and proletarians. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman. In a word, oppressor and oppressed stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight that each time ended either in revolutionary reconstruction of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold gradation of social rank. In ancient Rome, we have patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, serfs. In almost all of these classes, again, subordinate gradations. The moderate bourgeoisie society that has sprouted from the ruins of the feudal society has not done away with class antagonisms. It has but established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in place of the old ones. Our epoch, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, possesses, however, this distinctive feature. It has simplified the class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers of the earliest towns. From these burgesses, the first elements of the bourgeoisie were developed. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opened up fresh ground for the rising bourgeoisie. The East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with the colonies, the increase in the means of exchange and commodities generally have to commit gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, to impulse, never before known, and thereby to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society a rapid development. The feudal system of industry, under which industrial production was monopolized by close guilds, now no longer sufficed for the growing wants of the new markets. The manufacturing system took its place. The guild masters were pushed on one side by the manufacturing middle class. Division of labor between the different corporate guilds vanished in the face of division of labor in each single workshop. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing, the demand ever rising. Even manufacture no longer sufficed. Thereupon, steam and machinery revolutionized industrial production. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant modern industry, the place of the industrial middle class by the industrial millionaires, the leaders of the whole industrial armies, the modern bourgeoisie. Modern industry has established the world's market for which the discovery of America paved the way. The market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication by land. This development has, in its turn, reacted on the extension of industry, and in proportion as industry, commerce, navigation, and railways extended, in the same proportion the bourgeoisie developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see, therefore, how the modern bourgeoisie is itself the product of a long course of development, of series of revolutions in the modes of production and of exchange. Each step in the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by the corresponding political advance of that class, an oppressed class under the sway of the feudal nobility, an armed and self-governing association in the medieval commune. Here, independent urban republic, as in Italy and Germany, were taxable third estate of the monarchy, as in France. Afterwards, in the period of manufacture proper, serving either the semi-feudal or the absolute monarchy as a counterpoise against the nobility, and in fact cornerstone of the great monarchies in general. The bourgeoisie has at last since the establishment of modern industry and of the world's market, considered for itself in the modern representative state exclusive political sway. The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie historically has played a most revolutionary part. The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, callous cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine anti-sentimentalism. Of Philistine sentimentalism in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in the place of the numberless, indefeasible chartered freedoms has set up that single unconscienceable freedom, free trade. In a word, for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. The bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage laborers. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass that the brutal display of vigor in the Middle Ages, which reactionists so much admire, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show that what man's activity can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that put in the shade all former exoduses of nations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered forms was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguished the bourgeoisie epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast, frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions, are swept away. All new formed ones become antiquated before they can only ossify. All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned. And man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. The bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world's market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and the consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionists, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries, whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants satisfied by the productions of the country, we find new wants requiring for their satisfaction of the products of distant lands and climes. In place of their old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations. And as in material, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literature there arises a world literature. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. The cheap prices of its commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls, and which it forces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. It compels other nations on pain of extinction to adopt the bourgeoisie mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, i.e., to become bourgeoisie themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. The bourgeoisie has subjected the country to the rule of the towns. It has created enormous cities, has greatly increased the urban population as compared with the rural, and has thus rescued a considerable part of the population from the idiocy of rural life, just as it has made the country dependent on the towns. So it has made barbarian and semi-barbarian countries dependent upon the civilized ones, nations of peasants on the nations of bourgeoisie, the East on the West. The bourgeoisie keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of the population, of the means of production and of property. It has agglomerated population, centralized means of production, and has concentrated property in a few hands. The necessary consequence of this was political centralization. Independent or but loosely connected provinces with separate interest laws, governments, and systems of taxation became lumped together into one nation with one government, one code of laws, one national class interest, one frontier, and one customs tariff. The bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. Subjection of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century could even a presentiment of that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? We see then the means of production and the exchange on whose foundation the bourgeoisie built itself up were generated in feudal society. At a certain stage in the development of these means of production and of exchange, the conditions under which feudal society produced and exchanged the feudal organization of agriculture and manufacturing industry, in one word, the feudal relations of property became no longer compatible with the already developed productive forces. They became so many fetters. They had to be burst asunder. But we'll go ahead and end that particular part there. So, that puts us on page 20. I think there's like 60 pages total. But yeah. This, Marx is already setting the stage. He's saying, look, the actual ruling classes couldn't be ruling without the labor of the working class. They have taken the labor, the creation of the working classes, and have built for themselves their own level of power, putting themselves on a class above us. It is the labor of the working man, of the laborer, of the artisan, all these people. They are the ones who create society. They should have control of what they have produced. But that feudal lord class, that what he calls the bourgeoisie or the bourgeois, it just takes and takes and takes. So, yeah. And so they are like, well, seeing as how you've done something, we'll give you a little bit. And it's like we force all jobs into industrialization, into urbanization. You have no need to live on your own out there in the countryside or in these rural areas. You're better off living in an urban environment where we can take advantage of you. So, yeah. And that's essentially the point Marx and Engels are making. They're like, look, they can do nothing without us doing the work. So, yeah. And we're only a third through the Communist Manifesto, this pamphlet by Marx and Engels. And yet you hear all the time people crying and whining, oh, it's an evil thing! Don't read it! You'll be brainwashed! No. It's just about the working man getting what's due. They put the work into things, thus they should control what is put out. It is their property, therefore. There is no longer, Marx and Engels are positing there is no longer a need for a king, a lord, a ruler. They just take advantage of you and give you a smidgen back. No. You have put the effort in. You have put the labor in. What is produced from that is yours to do with as you see fit. But yeah, that's all we're looking at when we're looking at the Communist Manifesto. This is just 1/3 of the way in. They do acknowledge, say, look, up to this point, this influence, it's allowed us to do things we wouldn't normally do because there's actually something to work for. But in the end, you have to understand this labor is our labor. It's not theirs. So, yeah. But we'll go ahead and end this episode there. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.